everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Daisy Jones and the Six Rewatch podcast. When I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut, which is another way to say Carpe Diem, and it's all about going after the things that you want in life. Now, something I wanted to do this year was rewatch the show Daisy Jones and the Six, and this time talk about it with other people. So I've actually already been through the exercise of going through each episode in depth of the show, that is. And one of the things that I wanted to do in this series was look at the book. I don't want to say versus the show. I want to say the differences between the book and the show. And there are a lot of differences. So I'm not going to be examining every single one of them here. But I do want to look at some of the things that felt like key differences to me. Some of them are bigger details, some of them are smaller, but all things that felt like they were a thing to talk about here. And because I think part of that conversation is when the book already exists and you know you're going to make a show, what things need to change and why. And maybe in some cases, as I'm going through the differences, I'll have ideas for that. And in other cases, I'm not really sure. And I'd love for anybody who has thoughts on why you might make some changes or keep some things the same. Feel free to contribute your thoughts to that in the comments here, because I think it's a really interesting process. When you adapt something, what is it that makes something work better for one format versus another? I think the book and the show are both things that I enjoy. I think for me, I tend to enjoy, and this is a general rule for me. I know a lot of people say the book is always better than the movie, or the book is always better than the show. For me, it tends to be the opposite, because as much as people say, yeah, but your imagination is, there's an infinite number of possibilities in your head when you're reading a book. I actually find that people who make movies and TV shows often, they're so good at their jobs. Every department is so thoughtful about the details they're putting into it that they're putting in things I couldn't have imagined. So, somebody adding music to the show totally changes my experience of it in a really positive way. So I do very much enjoy the show. The show is what I saw first, so I might be biased towards preferences for the show's take on the story in some instances. But I know a lot of people did this in the reverse order, and they loved the book before the show came out, and so I think this is a really fun opportunity to unpack some of the differences. There are some very big differences in the story itself to look at, and it'll be really fun to see people's takes on what they connected with in one format versus the other. Now, of course, I should say that the book was written by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and the show, produced by Hello Sunshine, put out on Amazon. We've been through the cast of characters. We've been starting to even hear some interviews from folks. And I think the first thing that I want to look at here, and this is is it the smallest detail or the biggest detail? I don't know. I want to look at the timeline. As we get to each section here, I'm going to sort of group things into sections, which means I am going to bounce around a lot in the story, but I intend to sort of group things together by category of thing to talk about. And the first thing I want to talk about is timeline. So the book starts chronicling events from 1965 when Daisy was 14. It starts in 1966 for the Six. The show starts a bit earlier. It starts in 1961. And we are going to see a younger version of Daisy as well. We're going to see, I think it was an 8-year-old version of Daisy in the show. The show ends in 1977. That's when we're going to get the performance at Soldier Field. And the book actually ends in 1979 for their tour. So they extended the whole timeline of Daisy Jones being with and around the Six is extended in the book. And then, of course, we have the interview timeline, which is a pretty sizable difference, I guess, when you think about what the show gives us. So in the book, the band seems to be like in their 60s, pushing 70s in their interviews. And with the show, they really didn't have a chance to age up those actors as much. So for me, although I don't know that it's explicitly said in the show, I read them as like 40s, maybe early 50s. But late 40s, I think, is sort of like where I would push that. So I do think that that adds a completely different element in terms of like if Daisy and Billy have been apart for a lot longer at that end point in the book. I think that sort of mixes things up a little bit. But yeah, the timeline is a bit different between the book and the show. Do I think that adds something different in the essence of it once we get into the meat of what's happening in the 70s? I don't know. I mean, I think in the show it gives you a nice whirlwind effect. Like they did all of this in such a short amount of time. It was this flash in the pan. It was amazing, and then it was over. I think with the book, they actually have a bit of a longer run together to be in each other's orbits to build that tension. Another thing with the book is that because it's in the interview, it's all done in interview format. Um, we're going to actually let's talk about the format difference, shall we? Let me add that piece here. So, in terms of format, the book is entirely done with interviews. And every now and then you'll get a little exposition at the top of a chapter, but for the most part, we're getting everything that's told to us is being told of us to us through somebody's point of view. The show does a bit of that, but it also gives us what maybe would be the general truth. It shows us what happened in a lot of these scenes, and then we get commentary about it from the interviews. And I think that's a massive difference. Now, maybe it's an important difference to have because if you really want to see a show that does the unreliable narrator thing, a show like The Affair has done that and it did it really well, where it every episode was split into different people's points of view, and you get to see roughly the same events happening from different people's perspectives, and you could actually see how differently they thought of things. Like people might even be wearing different outfits because somebody remembered it differently, or they might remember differently who started the conversation or ended the conversation or what their personality was like. So the actors in that show got a chance to be a lot of different characters because they were showing many different versions of what everybody thought that person was. This show, does it need to tread on that same ground? It could, but there's so much to tell, and with only 10 episodes to do it, instead it gives us this version of the truth, and then we get these takes on it from different characters as they're being interviewed. And it's two different things for me. It's two completely different things. I think the result of it is that in the book, you can more often see discrepancies in how people remembered things. Sometimes it's small details. Sometimes two characters back to back will say, I remember it this way, and somebody else will say, I remember it this way, and they're not in alignment. And so that's a really fun thing to consider. The show is giving us a version of the truth. And so it loses a little bit of that essence of people remembering things differently. It has it a little, but not as much. And I think that might have been a necessary evil for 10 episodes to, cover as much ground as they needed to in the plot. So let's talk about some of the different characters. Because the book is all done through interviews, and there are a few characters that there are a number of characters that we'll see in the book that we don't see in the series. And a few of them felt like ones that I wanted to highlight here. So one of them from the book is Elaine Chang, who is the biographer of Daisy Jones' Wildflower. In the show, they sort of throw all of that onto Jonah Berg. Jonah Berg in the show is both the writer of the articles for the article for Rolling Stone magazine, and he's also somebody who is a biographer, wrote a book about Daisy Jones. So they sort of merged Elaine and Jonah into the Jonah in this show. And they also sort of stripped down Jonah's role in the show, because in the book he had actually done more than one article. So Elaine is one of them. So sometimes we're getting, what's interesting about Elaine is that we do hear from her periodically through the end of the book, where she adds a perspective of the feminism and the mark on feminism that Daisy Jones made. And this is something that Jonah Berg didn't really explore. So it adds that layer. I may be a little bit surprised that we didn't get an Elaine Chang take on Daisy Jones in terms of the feminism of Daisy Jones, given the lens that this show was produced through. But that was in the book. Um, Another character that was in the book, and I honestly I wrote this down initially. I'm not sure that he makes a huge impact in the book, so I can see why he didn't make it into the show. The interviewee Greg McGinnis, who was the former concierge at the Continental Hyatt House, they move on from Daisy's early days kind of quickly in the book, and in the show. I mean, the show you move through three different ages of Daisy in the first episode. But I do think that Greg probably had some interesting things to say. He was able to add some context, like, even when she was young, you noticed her. But if he was in the book, I kind of wish I would have had a little bit more understanding of what it was he noticed about her, because he sees a lot of people. So what jumped out? A pretty sizable character in the book that doesn't exist in the show is Hank Allen. So Daisy does move into the Chateau Marmont when she is in the book, and she gets a manager named Hank Allen, but she starts dating him. They have a relationship that seems to be a pretty toxic one. He wants her to record covers, Runner Records, which is the label in the book, as opposed to LMR Records, which we see in the show. She signs with Runner Records pretty early on. That's the label the Six is on too. Everybody wants her to record covers. They don't think that what she has written is finished or good enough at this point. And at this point, Daisy starts that romantic relationship with Hank. Everybody seems to think he's taking advantage of her in terms of the interviews that are done in the book. And she fires him. He seems kind of violent at that point. And she starts working with Rod, who in the book is managing the Six already. And because she's been in the orbit of the Six and she's recorded a song with them, Rod is kind of already doing things for her. So it's not necessarily the hardest leap to go from Hank Allen to Rod. There are a lot of things that are different about that from in the show, because in the show, Rod is the tour manager, but not the full-time manager. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more later. But the absence of Hank is a fairly significant absence. And one of the reasons why I think if you're shortening this to 10 episodes, they actually cut out a bunch of those early days of Daisy Jones starting to work with the Six, because in the show, in the book, she had a manager and she was working on her own album, and the Six had theirs, and they abbreviated that and threw them together fairly quickly. And I think for brevity and to tell the show in 10 episodes, I think it was a good move the way that they abbreviated it. Um, I think that. I don't know if you're from the industry, if you think it's unrealistic. I don't know what people would think about that. But for me, that did feel like a proper place to edit the story down a bit, even though we get a little bit of like confusion about managers in the show, I think, as we go along. Now, I also wanted to mention, before I get into any specific characters, I'd like to get into details that had a different intention between the book and the show. And again, I'm sure there are quite a lot that you could pick out here, but there are several that I wanted to highlight. The first one, and this is something you'll see in the first episode of the show, Daisy's first sexual experience. In the show, it's pretty clearly portrayed as rape. The book paints it a little bit more like, no, she wasn't interested in that experience. She didn't want to have that experience, but it was a necessary evil to be sexually active at that time in that world. So for me, the show draws a very clear, definitive moral line about what happened there. And, you know, even Daisy's interview about it in the show, she says, people called me naive, but I wasn't naive. I was just a baby. She was taken advantage of. She was abused. And so the show really takes a stance on this. Um, the the book paints it more like she was playing the game. And this is one of the things that came along with it. So, you know, it's for me, a pretty significant detail. I don't know if in reality, if that difference in the detail would change how Daisy processes that and how it influences who Daisy becomes in the story. Because I think in both scenarios, she didn't want to have that experience and had it. Um, but I do think there's something to be said for the show saying, no, 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 like this is not okay. Um, I think there's this, with the show potentially being seen by so many people, I think maybe there was a message they were trying to send there. Another detail from the book, and you might argue with me about the fact that I take issue with this, but in the book, Daisy suggests an edit to Wyatt Stone's lyrics. He wrote a song. She sees the song. She's got a better idea for part of it. She tells him the idea. He uses it and he doesn't credit her. In the show, Daisy has her own lyrics written in her own songbook. Wyatt picks it up uninvited. She He asks, "How does this sound?" She sings it to him once. He says, "Do that again." She says, "Hard pass." And he takes the song and he makes it his own and he gets a deal and he puts it out there in the world. I can appreciate the point that both of these things are meant to say he stole something from Daisy. For me, what we get in the show is a lot more reason for her to be really angry about it and really protective of herself because the whole thing was hers and he took the whole thing and he never even mentioned her name um and in the show. And so, it creates not only this um, protectiveness over her lyrics that she brings into her relationship with Billy. But she also then has a point of connection with Simone, who has a similar experience happen with somebody taking the vocals that she recorded. So the show is able to use that detail and sort of make these stronger bonding moments for some of these relationships or tension moments with the relationships she's dealing with in the show. In the book, I mean, look, should he have credited her for having a contribution to the song? Yes. However, it was originally his song. And for me, it's not the same thing at all. And it feels like a slightly lesser infraction. Now, if you're from the industry, you may wildly dispute this. And I'm sure that, Daisy probably could have sued him. I don't know. There's probably a reason maybe things would be different now. Maybe there's a reason you'd see so many people credited so that nobody can sue. I don't know. But it feels not the same. I think Daisy's whole song being taken from her feels really, really bad, and the version in the book feels kind of bad. Um, but both of them are meant to have the same effect in terms of she's now very cautious around people stealing her material. A couple things around the SNL show. In the book, first of all, the band does two songs. They're prepared to do two songs. But for the second song, at the last minute, Billy tells the band, "You can't get on stage. I'm going to do a song with Daisy." And he takes a song that normally would have had the whole band, and it's like one of the slower, more emotional, like love song type of songs. And he says, "It's just going to be Daisy and I." And normally it would have been Eddie and Daisy, even in the book, but he takes that spot as well. And so they sing a duet, and in the book, it's absolutely electric. They have this deep connection that's very visible through the screen. Camilla sees it while watching TV. It's very painful for Camilla. In the show, I do find that the SNL performance is also very impactful and also sort of an important pivot moment for Daisy and Billy, but in a very different way. It doesn't feel like it's specifically about them feeling deep love for each other or expressing deep love to each other in that way. For me, in the show, because it comes after Daisy's OD. She's been feeling really rattled. This is a performance that she needs to do. She doesn't have her drugs with her to balance her out, and she's feeling really nervous. And what I feel from that performance is the connection between Billy and Daisy as Billy supports her. It is maybe the most codependent I feel of like anything that I see from the two of them on the show, because she leans on him so heavily because she doesn't have her normal comfort mechanisms and her coping mechanisms around her, and she needs some comfort right now. And so you can see really the way that they're making eye contact. It's really about saying, you've got this, like, I'll hold you up here. And she's seeing that too, and she's saying, okay. And then by the end of the song, she's kind of back to dancing it out the way that she normally would. And I think he's sort of, it's one step to help get her back on her feet. So I think that both in the book and the show, the SNL show performance is important, but for me, it feels like in very, very different ways. Also, in the book, after the SNL show, there's an after party, and Billy goes back to his hotel room, doesn't want to see the after party. Daisy goes to the after party, but leaves it early. And she goes back to Billy's hotel room, and they talk all night. And she tells him she wants to go to rehab. And he eventually picks up the phone to get the number for the rehab center that he went to. And instead, when he picks it up, it just so happens that the concierge was just then connecting him with their sound engineer, who's named Artie in the book. He was Tobias in the show. And Artie wants to tell him that Teddy just died of a heart attack. In the show, Teddy does have a heart attack at the SNL show, but he survives it, and they get more time with Teddy. In the book, he does not survive it. So even though Daisy had said she wanted to take a break, or she wanted to go to rehab, when this conversation started, now with this news, they all feel like they need their coping mechanisms. Billy almost relapses himself. They all take a break to deal with things. And Daisy ends up hitting the drugs even harder, which is something that Billy is going to feel guilty about when they reunite. So there are some really key points that are different here at that SNL show period. So those are some of the details that I thought had a different intention, and I'd be curious if there's anything broadly like that you think had that kind of resonance for you as well. That I'm going to get into a number of specific characters that we see between both the book and the show. But in terms of other details that aren't sorted in that way, what else comes up for you as you're looking through it? Now, okay, let's talk about Daisy's parents. Daisy's parents, for me, it's wildly different between the book and the show, what the function of those characters is. There, to me, is a much lesser focus on the impact of Daisy's parents in the book. In the book, first of all, when you get the early descriptions of her parents, I felt that there was more emphasis of her dad ignoring her than her mom. There really wasn't that much fleshed out with her mom. And in the show, that relationship, particularly with her mother, seems to be a massive driver for every single thing that we see from Daisy, for the level of insecurity she has, for the feeling of being ignored. This comes up in a lot of conversations. It comes up in how she approaches everything about being with the Six and with Billy. As we've gone through these deep dives, there's even been speculation, like, does she get her need to sort of smile through conflict from her mom? There is a lot of that in the show, but the book doesn't spend very much time speculating on Daisy's relationship with her parents or how it made her feel. So it's an element that was really built out for the show. And I guess your mileage may vary. In the book, did you want more of that? In the show, did you want less of that? I find that type of storyline very interesting. This, like, where did she come from? And what makes Daisy Daisy? And part of that is like what her upbringing was. So I found that an interesting detail that was added to the show, or at least expanded upon in the show. Now, in terms of the book, Daisy also at one point says, I was living, so in the show, Daisy basically runs away from her parents and lives with Simone and never goes back. She has no relationship with her parents up until the point where, first of all, she breaks into her parents' house. They are not there. They've moved. They never told her. And then when she's on tour in 1977, her mother sends her a bunch of pictures, and that is the first interaction she's had with her mother in a lot of years. The book handles it very differently. At one point, Daisy says, I was living with Simone for 2 weeks before I went home to get more clothes. My dad said, did you break the coffee maker this morning? I said, Dad, I don't even live here. At the point when Daisy breaks into her parents' house, they're actually there. However, it is Simone who bails her out of jail. So they exist. They still have a function in her lives. There is some line of communication opened, but they couldn't care less. Nobody's contacting the other one. She's sent to jail. Her parents know it, and they don't bail her out. One more detail that I picked up on this, Daisy's parents actually end up having dinner with Daisy and Nikki, with Niccolo in the book. So even well into her career, there's still a presence in her life to some degree. So for me, that's the pretty big disparity that they can pop up every now and then in the book, but in the show, it's only for these really dramatic emotional moments. I do think that the thread of what the show expanded upon existed, especially when I think about the fact that Daisy's parents were at the house when Daisy broke in and they did not bail her out of jail. I think about how the show takes a detail like that and maybe changes the details of the story, but keeps the essence of that feeling. Um, so I personally am glad we got more of the story with the parents. I thought that was interesting. I don't know that I would have wanted to get more than we got for what the show was supposed to tell us. I think we got just the right amount in the show. The book, this is really not a big detail. And I don't know if you found yourself craving more of it if you read the show, if you read the book before you saw the show. Okay, Jonah Berg. Let's talk a little bit about Jonah Berg. I've mentioned a bit of this already, but in the book, Jonah does 2 articles. The first one is actually quite complimentary of Daisy. It was called The Six That Should Be Seven. Daisy loved it. Billy probably not so much. But she was inclined to like Jonah Berg from what she got from that first article. But he comes back to do a second article for the Aurora release. And that is what we see fleshed out in the show. And this is when he attends the studio session. This is also when there's going to be he's going to see the experience of Billy and Daisy singing at a piano bar. So there's a whole bunch of different elements that are added into this Jonah Berg piece, but they can do that because in the book there's more time that Daisy spends with the band, with the Six. So the Daisy Jones has the experience of opening for them on a tour as they finish up a tour for their own album. And then Daisy and Billy write together for the Aurora album. So she has the whole opening act experience, and then they have the tour together where she's part of the band. So that's really a lot more on-ramp to get somebody like Jonah coming in and covering them from more than one angle. I have to say, in the show, I think the Jonah Berg character does what he needs to in terms of stirring things up and creating conflict the way I think that a reporter would do. He finds where he thinks the story is. And then he starts leveraging it to get better stories. I think all of that is how it would potentially work in the real world. The only thing that I don't know we needed in the show, because I disagree with this point. Jonah Berg himself in the show says that if Rolling Stone had really thought anything of this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, they would have sent somebody more senior. That doesn't make sense to me. Um, I don't understand why Jonah would say that. Jonah can acknowledge that he isn't the most senior person on staff. That's fair. But if Daisy Jones and the Six are a relatively new band, nobody on staff would have a relationship with them. So, somebody has to build something brand new. And most of the people who are already, beat reporters or they've been out there for a while, they probably have a lot of pre-existing relationships that they're currently following up. So Daisy Jones and the Six, at the point when they bring Jonah in, has already had Honeycomb or Look at Us Now. And that was a massive song. It was a huge song, and they played it at the Diamond Head Festival, and they got all this buzz. And Daisy clearly is a crowd favorite. And, Billy has an essence about him as well. This is a band to watch. And I can't imagine a band that's got a song that's already risen the charts the way Look at Us Now did. I can't imagine Rolling Stone would think they were nobodies. So I think Jonah saying that if they really, you know, thought this band was much to watch, they would have sent somebody else. I don't get the point. Why do we need that line in here? I think they got somebody who had the bandwidth and the drive to build the relationship and find the story that would really uh, lift this band and get more magazines sold. Okay, let's talk about Simone because Simone's a wildly different character in the book than in the show. In um in the show, she has so many more dimensions. She has her music performances. She is in the disco world in the show. She is a lesbian. She's in the closet and she meets Bernie and they start a really important relationship. Bernie's the best. And none of that really exists. So in the book, she's pretty much entirely focused about work. There's maybe a throwaway line towards the end where she's like, I got married, I had a kid, I got divorced. It happens that fast. But Simone's personal life is not a thing that's explored in the book. At the beginning of the book, she starts out, she seems less stable, um, which is interesting to me because in the show, Simone, her career isn't exactly taking off. I mean, she's gotten good opportunities. She's getting those somewhat steadily, but she doesn't seem to have the kind of opportunities that Daisy does for her career to explode on that level, even with Teddy's support. So Simone is doing okay. She has her own place to stay. She has her own apartment, but she is looking for a roommate. But she's also pretty stable in what she's got. In the book, she doesn't really have her footing in that way, even though she's so career focused. And Daisy stays with her really short term before Simone actually has to move in with her cousin. They do end up being supportive of each other, but there is, I think, more of an element of how much Daisy leans on her in the show. In the book, the first time that Daisy sings on stage is actually when her boyfriend at the time, Jim Blades of a band called Me Vita, invites her to perform on stage. Um, in the show, it's Simone that does that. And it also serves as the introduction to the character of Teddy. So I can totally see why we didn't need to spend time focusing on Jim in the show. If you've got 10 episodes, this does not feel like a detail you need to explore with numerous relationships from Daisy. But they piled all of that onto this character of Simone. In the book, Simone is so career focused, her R&B dance hits have success in Europe and she tours there. So she goes away to tour. Whereas in the show, she goes off to New York when things kind of fall apart for her in California. She spends time with Bernie. She gets footing in the disco world. Um, but in the book, she seems more like a lone wolf character who's having success and just doing it on her own. So a lot of differences there. And I think, the fact that we get to have Bernie introduced and we get to have the element of Simone being queer introduced, and we get to have the element of Simone having her vocal tracks stolen. All of those end up being things that really flesh out a picture of Simone that we would not have had previously. And we spend more time with Simone when the show goes to Greece. When the book takes her to Italy, it's kind of a different she she's supposed to meet Daisy in Thailand. Daisy leaves Thailand. I'll come back to this later. But eventually Simone does meet up with her in Italy, and it ends up being, I think, less fleshed out as an experience for Simone, even though she sort of chased Daisy halfway around the world. So, okay. So Simone, much more of a complete character in the book, and a very interesting one that I think adds completely new elements to this show and allows us to explore the time period in a different way. Let's talk about the Dunn brothers. Um, Both the two Dunn brothers and the band. I lumped a whole bunch of stuff into this category because there's so many characters involved in it. So first of all, let's talk about the actual Dunn brothers, Billy and Graham. In the book, it's explicitly said that there's a 2-year age gap between them, and Billy's pretty protective of Graham in the early stages of the book. I don't know that the show explicitly says what the age gap is between Billy and Graham, but it feels like it's more than 2 years between them. Now, who makes up the Dunn brothers is also quite different in the book. So the Dunn brothers band, we have Warren on drums, just like we have it in the show. We have the bassist Pete Loving. We have rhythm guitar from Chuck Williams, who Billy says was better than he was on guitar. Of course, the core was Billy and Graham. So that's where it starts. So we've got 5 people to start off what's going to be the 6. Chuck gets drafted to Vietnam and he dies overseas. And so now we're down to 4. We need somebody new on rhythm guitar. Pete's brother, Eddie, who is no longer Eddie Roundtree like he's in the show, he's Eddie Loving, Pete's brother. He is invited to play rhythm guitar. So now we're back up to 5. So he is a late addition to the band. And then Karen comes in the latest. So we are now up to the 6. In the show, Billy is actually kind of added later. We start with a core of Warren, Graham, and Eddie, who were roughly the same age, friends from school, and they kind of hoodwink Billy into joining them to make 4. We have the character of Pete, and then Pete decides to go another direction. And then we've got Karen, who comes in later. So in the show, we end up with 5 members of the 6, versus in the book, we get 6 members of the 6. If Pete had stayed in the show, it would have been 6. But here's the thing. I actually think it was a really good move, even though you could say it's weird to have 5 people in the 6. And the show explains it a couple of ways. In the show, Karen is the one who throws out the name suggestion when everybody's sitting around a diner table at the end of a meal. And she's looping in Camilla, who feels like a part of the group. And Camilla says, "Thank you." And then it becomes a running joke later, not a long running joke, but it is referenced again in the show. There is a bit of a wink, like, yeah, it's kind of ironic, that we've got 5 members of the 6. I like the change. I can understand if you know math, you've gotta do some mental gymnastics to get you to 5 people in the 6. But I think it was a good choice, and here's why. In the book, I felt like the personalities of the people in the 6, or the Dunn brothers, was a little bit more of a flat structure. I think that there were personality attributes that felt very blended between the characters. And Pete doesn't serve a ton of purpose for me in the book. He is Eddie's brother. He brings Eddie into the band in the book. But Pete spends most of his time pining after a girl who's nowhere near the band. He has a long distance relationship, who is much more focused on that long distance relationship than he is. Like, the band is just for fun for him. It's no big deal. Like, he is ready to leave like first. Um, and he just doesn't add a lot for me to the book. So why would you want to spend time on a character like that in the show? What they did was they took, they had Pete find some other professional opportunity. They pulled him out of the band in the show, and then they really honed in on specific personality traits that we could latch onto as viewers for each of the members of the band. We get somebody like Eddie, who really has a bitterness to him that develops slowly in the book because he's so new when Pete first brings him in. And it takes like a good, maybe almost 100 pages before we start getting meaningful lines of Eddie saying, like, that Billy. Um, so it blooms with Eddie, but by the end of the book, you can feel that bitterness, and the show focuses on that from the very beginning. The show also focuses on Graham being sort of the loyal puppy dog to his brother. He can at times say, like in an interview, no, I mean, Billy doesn't really understand himself. He can have some honest assessments of Billy, but he's always going to back Billy up. And so he's that loyal family guy who wants the kind of family that Billy has, and he's going to support his brother. That's the guy we meet in the show. Book Graham is a little more critical of his brother, I find. And that also blooms over time, but it really wears on him to be in a band with his brother for that long. Um, Warren, I feel like has, in this show, they really play up this, like, come on, isn't it great to be here, guys, element. He's happy to be doing drugs, living on a boat. I think he's the guy that has perspective, like, we have awesome lives. Can we just acknowledge that? And that's an element we see sometimes in his character in the book, but it's also can be described, a couple characters have moments like that. I think it's more concentrated into Warren in the show. I think Karen is, I feel, pretty consistent between the book and the show. And she already stands out because she's the woman in the six, and I don't know that you need to mess with that character a whole bunch. But with the guys, I think there was so much blending that was happening that I like the fact that they gave us something more specific, like a very particular character portrait that they stayed consistent with in this show. Okay. In terms of who named the six, I just mentioned how the six got named in the show. In the book, this is one of those points of unreliable narrator moments. Both Eddie and Karen think they named the six. Also, with Karen, in the book, the Dunn brothers actually open for the Winters in multiple shows. It's part of, they basically, the Dunn brothers basically have 3 tours. And, they have this first one that they're going on where they open for the Winters for some of it. They have one where Daisy's their opening act, and they have the Aurora tour once they're the six. Also, I would say just in general, the book is a little bit slower to grow the chip on the shoulder that people have for Billy in the band. And I mentioned this about Eddie, but I think this is true of every character. And I think the show has the luxury to show us this from the beginning because we're getting these interviews throughout the first episodes where characters are giving commentary on the stuff that we're experiencing from even the 60s. And so when somebody has snark all those years later, it's infusing into their takes on what happened in the 60s as well. In the book, it really takes a minute to ramp into that. Okay. Another detail that I wanted to mention, actually, just to play off of that as well, the sort of chip on the shoulder that Graham has about Billy, that evolves. But in an example like the album cover, the shooting of the album cover, we hear Graham say something like, I'd been living in my brother's shadow from basically the day I was born. I was starting to wonder how much longer I had to do that. That is a really different vibe to something Graham would say than we tend to see in the show. Okay, I wanted to stop down here in Karen and Graham for a moment because a lot of the essence of what I get from them in the book and the show pretty much aligns. I feel like it's pretty close. It's not all portrayed exactly the same way, but the point is the same. Um, but I did want to highlight, and I actually want to read. This is the one time I'm going to actually like open this book and read from it. Um, the way they get together in the book is different from in the show, but just as cute. In the show, of course, you may remember how much I enjoyed the the ragging on Barry Manilow and the fact that somehow Barry Manilow song got approved for use in the show anyway. And then the first time Karen and Graham hook up, it's to like the blasting of a Barry Manilow song, even though they've been saying how much they hate his songs the whole time. I thought that was so funny, and so good. And of course, the book can't do that. But what the book did, I also enjoy. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip to the page where we hear about how Karen and Graham got together. Graham says, I was waiting for Billy when my phone rang. Karen says, I don't know why it was that day that I decided to do it. Graham says, I said hi, and Karen just said hi. Karen says, we were sort of quiet on the phone for a second, and then I said, how come you've never made a move on me? I could hear him drinking a beer. I could hear him take a sip. He said, I don't take shots I know I'll miss. It was out of my mouth before I decided to say it. I said, I don't think you'll miss, Dunn. And then as soon as I said it, there was a dial tone. Graham says, I've never run anywhere faster than down that hall to her room. Karen says, 3 seconds later, that's not an exaggeration. There's a knock on my door. I opened it and Graham was out of breath. A tiny run down the hall and he was out of breath. There's more. I could keep reading, but basically, what we're getting there is the same in terms of Karen has to be the one to say, just do it. The show has a little bit of a longer road to get there. There is a friendship between them. Karen initially rejects him, and then she has to be the one to say, no, let's make this thing happen. And then they hook up to Barry Manilow. In the book, we're still getting a Karen who has to take that initiative, and Graham's been pining for her for a really long time. I think the relationship between them has just as much of the same, oh, this is going to be a problem at the end sort of setup where, Karen does not want to have a family and Graham wants to have a family. And that's going to come to a head at some point. It happens in both formats. So, although the details might be a little different from here to there, I think the intention of it remains the same. So, that's a bit about what's happening with the Dunn brothers. Let's talk about Rod. And I think with that, we also need to explore Teddy a little bit because the way the book and the show handle managers is completely different, and some may say confusing in the show. In the book, Rod Reyes is the Six's manager from the beginning. Even in the Pittsburgh days, even in the Winters days, like first tour days, Rod is their manager. Rod gets the Six gigs on the Strip right when they come out to LA. And he gets Teddy to come see them. So Teddy comes to see them the first time because they're already playing at the Troubadour. In the book, Rod is a lot more prominent than Teddy. And probably the practical reason for that is because Teddy has died, so he can't be interviewed. And everything's being told in interviews in the book. In the show, they solve that problem by finding footage of Teddy doing an interview on the Merv Griffin show. And so he's not speaking direct to the camera, to the interviewer, but he is speaking to Merv Griffin, and they're able to splice in appropriate details from that into where the interviews would normally be for him. So they're able to put that there. Now, if we think about Rod plus the managers, we take away Hank Allen for Daisy. She doesn't have a manager at all. But we also cut very short her journey getting into the six. Um, and so having Teddy representing the label and sort of being able to bring everybody together is something that kind of it works in the show because those are characters we've established. Rod has not met Daisy. Rod in the show meets the six on one stop of the Winter's tour and has a conversation with them and sort of registers it, sort of doesn't. And then, the six does their thing on the East Coast, and then they take the initiative to follow Rod's advice and go out to LA, and they find him there. And he's not managing them initially. He gives them a connection to Filthy McNasty's to start performing there. And the six eventually comes into the orbit of Teddy. And once Teddy brings them to the label, he gets them signed. He, helps nurture them, and then they start getting more opportunities. Rod comes in as a tour manager and becomes an important presence in the back episodes of the show. These are really different things, and I think it's worth sort of stopping down on this. Again, with Hank, if you're not going to spend a lot of time in this early stage of Daisy's career where she's an opening act for the six, I don't know that it helps her to have a manager in the show. And that's another character you need to focus on. And I don't know that that gets us to the story we want to tell in 10 episodes in the show of her relationship with Billy. So they cut that character out. They cut that whole early part out. And her connection with Teddy is what connects her to the six. Rod versus Teddy is an interesting one. And I do wonder what came first, the chicken or the egg on this when they were working on like how to adapt this. Did they know they wanted Timothy Oliphant and there was an availability issue? Was it that they actually saw more potential for extra storyline with Teddy to be a father figure? Because in the book, even though we don't get a ton of Teddy, Teddy absolutely is somebody who's a replacement father for Billy. Billy looks to him for approval on a lot of things. And that element exists already. So the show took that nugget and fleshed it out and said, what if Teddy is a father figure for those who need it? And then it built out a bunch of storylines and it focused more on people's parental issues. And it really let that part of the story bloom, even in places where it was more subtle in the book. That's not really something that you could do with the Rod that we saw in the book. Rod was very much the business guy, and was trying to massage tricky situations to make sure that the business of it all was running smoothly still. So in the show, we just sort of have to think like there was nobody really doing that, but maybe Teddy was sort of doing that. And also like, well, there was conflict in the band, and that was just nobody was exactly smoothing it over all the time. But Teddy does hook them up with opportunities like the Diamond Head Festival, and he hooks them up with, opportunities to work at more places on the strip, and he starts hooking them up with, getting a record together and getting them in the studio. Like he is able to make a lot of things happen. So he's not a full-time manager necessarily, but he's serving some of the same functions when it's needed in the show. But I do wonder with Rod, maybe they just felt like they had so much with the father element of Teddy that they wanted to focus on that in those middle episodes where Rod disappears and then Rod comes back for the tour. Or maybe it was an availability issue for Timothy Oliphant. I don't know. That's my most likely guess for it. But if you really know the business side of this and it doesn't hold up, what are your thoughts? How does this work for you? Now, here's where we start getting into some love triangle stuff. So let's talk about Camilla. First of all, minor point, Camilla does not meet Billy at a laundromat like she does in the show. In the book, she is a cocktail waitress at a gig Billy's playing at. That's where they meet. I'm not totally sure why you couldn't have it happen that way in this show. It does add a fun element where Camilla gets to play it really cool. Like, I have no idea who you are when she meets Billy at the laundromat, but um, Camilla's parents like Billy to some degree. They're not as much of a factor. The parents are, in general, not as much of a factor in the book. Um, Camilla's parents are not so much a fan of Billy in the early days and in the book and or in the show. And in the show, there's also like a little bit of a reference to like some seedy past of Camilla's mom. Um, so there's some interesting elements to latch onto there in a deep dive for the show. Okay, here are some points of major divergence. So in the book, Billy asks Camilla to come to LA. When they're thinking of going to LA, when the Dunn brothers are thinking of going to LA, Billy asks Camilla. She says no. She breaks up with him. He goes to LA. She does not. He starts sleeping around. He's miserable. He gets a record contract and he calls Camilla and he asks her to marry him. Totally different. In the show, Camilla is devastated. First of all, Billy full on decides to move to LA with the band. They're super excited. And then Camilla turns up in that same conversation. He's like, oh, yeah, you. She feels like such an afterthought to me for him at that moment. He's like, okay, I'm moving. If you'd like, you can. She's like, I'm not, what? Like it feels like it would be nice if you came, but I'm going. Camilla cries about it, but decides to move to LA. And so this whole bit about him sleeping around in the early days doesn't happen because she's with him in LA when he gets there. And she's part of the process of the Dunn brothers like getting their footing in LA in the show. So in the book, for me, this is really already we're establishing that there's a very big difference between book and show Camilla. Now, in the book, we're going to see Billy voice his love for Camilla a lot, like a lot. Um, Sometimes he does it in a way where I feel like he's lying to himself. Later in the book, he gets clear that there's also a pull towards Daisy, but for me, that pull comes so much later, and like there's so much less volume of his feelings for Daisy that I believe there's like an equality in terms of his depth of feeling for these people, and it's a different type of feeling for each of them, but I don't necessarily feel like one over the other in the book. But yeah, in the book, Billy is very clear about voicing his love for Camilla. And in the show really um presents Camilla as like, yeah, she was there and she was willing to move across country. And she was, they even in those early shows that the Dunn brothers are playing at Filthy McNasty's, they almost portray her like a groupie, like a fan. Like what you could look at some of those scenes and be like, oh, she's just one of the people at the show. Um, he has certainly love for her, but once Daisy comes into the picture, I feel a very strong pull to Daisy, much more so than what I feel in the book. Um, and with Camilla, I don't I don't often think in the show that he's making decisions with her being the priority. Okay, in the book, Billy cheats on Camilla on their first tour, and she says, you suspect, then you sort of unsuspect, then you suspect again, then you tell yourself you're crazy, then you ask yourself whether fidelity is really something you value above all else. Let me put it this way. I've seen a lot of marriages where everyone is faithful and no one is happy. Okay. So is she saving face there? Is that how she's feeling? Because later in her letter to him, where we see it portrayed in the show as a fight and in a conversation, she says basically the same thing. But in a letter in the book, she says, you have until November 30th, and then you're going to be a good man for the rest of your life. You got it? So on the one hand, that first quote, she's being a little softer about, you know what, people do things in marriages. And that doesn't mean you can't have a happy marriage. But then, you know, sh that's interview Camilla saying this. Her line has moved all the way in all of these years, right? So if the interview is happening in 2012 in the book, and we're looking back at, you know, 60s, 70s here, interview Camilla is like, people cheat. It happens. Like, is it a happy marriage when everybody's on their best behavior all the time? That's 2012 Camilla saying this. And, young Camilla was saying you have until November 30th and then you're going to be a good man for the rest of your life. You got it? So, okay, I'll be very transparent with this. I don't get Camilla in the book. And I'm so sorry if you've lived a life like Camilla. Maybe you can help walk me through. I'm really trying to understand like Camilla's choices here. I'm trying to respect Camilla's choices here, but I much prefer the Camilla we see in the show. Um, there are a couple details why, but her line has moved. She has like sacrificed her entire point of view from when she was young, where she was prepared to say, you don't get to be this guy, versus the person who says, you were this guy. Like, okay. Um, like what am I supposed to take away from Camilla there that she doesn't like? I'm being told that this is a character with a bunch of backbone, but I don't see her having that with Billy. Billy, it wasn't cheating on her when he first moved out to LA in the book because they were broken up, but he stepped out, when he moved to LA and she didn't. And then he goes on tour and he's cheating on her all the time. Again, not once, like many times, many different people. Um, and that's just the beginning of this. And she says, when I have that first kid, Julia, you are going to be a good guy. And is he going to be a good guy after that? I don't think so. Like, in terms of the relationship with Camilla, what's her definition of this? Because she said a really hard line here, and she does not hold on to it at all. In the book, Billy says, do you know what you do with that level of trust when someone says, I trust you so much I can tolerate you having secrets? You cherish it. But did he? I mean, what does cherish really look like? Yeah, he talks about how much he loves her in the book, but he still, as far as I'm concerned, has an emotional affair with Daisy. Um, so I mean, goodness. I don't know if this is a detail worth noting here, but in the book, Camilla rents their house while Billy is in rehab. And in the show, Billy rents their house as a surprise gift to Camilla with their first check that they get for their first hit song. Another pretty big difference is because the book gives us more times, more tours for the Dunn brothers, she has more than one pregnancy. So, yes, she has Julia, as we see in the show, but also Camilla is pregnant with twins on the Six's second tour, which is called the Numbers Tour. She comes along for the beginning of that tour until she gets too far along in her pregnancy. And this is the tour where Daisy's the opening act. So she actually is up close to sort of the early days of this Daisy-Billy relationship forming. In the book, after Teddy's death, when the band goes back on tour, Camilla goes with them for the rest of it because she's kind of afraid Billy's going to fall off the wagon. So she's a stabilizing force for Billy. Completely different from the show, right? Because in the show, Teddy survives that first heart attack. And so we don't need to have this element of the story come in. So it just diverges there. Okay, in the book, and this is where these last couple points about Camilla are really where Camilla come apart for me in the book. In the book, there's that confrontation between Daisy and Camilla. In the show, this confrontation happens when Daisy is at the hotel and she's found a piano to play. Camilla comes into the room and she seeks Daisy out and has this conversation. In the book, Daisy's trying to get into her hotel room and Camilla finds her and helps her get into her room and instigates this conversation. So this confrontation sort of exists in both the book and the show, but feel completely different to me. In the book, Camilla is in control. She says, Daisy, he loves you. You know that he loves you. I know that he loves you, but he's not going to leave me. She also says, I'm not going to give up on him. I'm not going to let him leave me. She also says, if you're waiting around hoping that something is going to crack, I just have to tell you it's not going to be me. And I can't let it be Billy, which means it's going to be you. Camilla says that Daisy should leave the band. In the show, in the same type of conversation, Daisy admits to having feelings about Billy and says that he's always going to choose Camilla. And Camilla is a little, Daisy's like, I accept it. I have to accept it. And Camilla's like insulted by that. She says, what? So I'm what? I'm just the guy he's with because like he can't leave me? Or I'm just the woman he's with because he can't leave me? She doesn't like it. She almost feels like a consolation prize. And it, I think, prompts both women towards a different action. Okay, so let's go back to the book here for a second. So Camilla is saying, he loves you. You know that he loves you. I know that he loves you, but he's not going to leave me. She's not going to let him leave her. When we get to the final chapter of the book, so these characters, Daisy does leave the band in the book. Camilla and Billy live out the rest of their lives. And then the final chapter of the book is an email from Camilla to her daughters on November 12th, 2012. And she says, after I'm gone, give your dad some time and then please tell him to call Daisy Jones. This is so horrifically unsatisfying to me. I don't understand. Like I want to understand, but why does Camilla put up with this? Why does she not just put up with it, but she creates the prison that she puts all of them in, particularly herself and Billy? She knows that Billy loves somebody else. She has stayed with him through at least one bout of him cheating on her with people. She's stayed with him through this emotional affair he's been having with Daisy. She knows he still loves Daisy. And none of this has made him the guy that she needed to leave. And she lives out the rest of her life knowing that this man loves another woman, that it never went away. Because when she dies, she leaves an email to her daughter saying, okay, tell him to go pursue Daisy. I mean, it's whiplash for me at this point with that final chapter in the book, because I don't know exactly how Billy's feeling about Daisy now. I don't know exactly how Daisy's feeling about him now, but because of what Camilla said, I assume that Billy has feelings for Daisy that he's been holding on to and trying to repress and suppress from Camilla for years, decades. But we don't have that standpoint for Daisy. So we don't quite know where it's going to go if Billy contacts Daisy Jones, but we know that he wants to. And Camilla has known for her entire adult life that he's wanted to, and she kept the shackles around both of them. Camilla would have rather lived a life with a man who loved another woman than find somebody who only had eyes for her. And at the end of it all, she enlists her daughters to do this. And her daughters would probably have a ton of questions. Like, I don't know what message, like, it's not just about keeping the parents together for the kids because they're old now in the book. Like it's just so confounding to me because Camilla is still in different ways portrayed as this person who can get her way. Um and I don't know, why does Camilla not want more for herself than this? I don't get why she doesn't want more. I get people make decisions to stay in things that aren't 100% working. I get that they do that all the time. I get it. And I know it can be really hard to fathom making big changes. But Camilla seems like a person who'd make a big change. So I don't know why she created this jail cell for all of them. I mean, was it good for Daisy that she told Daisy to skedaddle? Maybe. Um, Daisy has made lemonade out of those lemons. She's saying like, she's moved on to other things. She's found other paths in her life. But for Camilla and Billy, they were just in this relationship where he always had this thing about him that was under the surface. Probably a lot of things about him that were under the surface. And in the show, when Camilla and Daisy have this conversation, and Daisy says, you know, I love him, but he's always going to choose you. And I know that. And it doesn't feel good, but I'm going to make it work. And Camilla's like, oh, you poor thing. Like, so I'm a consolation prize and you're a martyr. What is that? Um, Camilla doesn't like that. Ultimately, Billy is going to, after their final show, he is going to make out with Daisy and then like start to go off of the rails. And Daisy is the one who says to Billy, you know what? I don't want this. I don't want us to be messed up together. I don't want to be broken together. I want to be whole with somebody, is what she's looking for. So Daisy steps away from Billy. Billy makes a decision to work really hard to go back to Camilla, but Camilla steps away from him and she says, no, 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 no. Like, you have crossed so many lines here. This is a bridge too far. And he fights for her and he says, I'm going to be the man. He stops with music. He commits himself to going to probably rehab, on a longer term commitment. He becomes the man that Camilla would want, but he's always had this piece of himself that loved Daisy. Because it happens this way in this show, I feel like Camilla has stood up for herself. She walked away from the thing that wasn't working. She was willing to let Billy change himself, but not willing to be there while he did it. Like, it's like, no, you come back to me when you're the guy. And when he comes back to her proving himself, she says, all right, I'll give you another chance. And I think she knows that he loves Daisy still, or she certainly still knows that he loves Daisy, but that's not an option for him. And that because Daisy isn't letting that happen, and because he doesn't want to be the broken version of himself with Daisy. And so he's working to be the good version of himself with Camilla. And Camilla gracefully accepts that this is what life looks like. By the time Billy comes back to her, he is willing to be the guy who's walked away from all of that stuff. So is there somebody better Camilla could find at this point? I don't know, because this version of Billy is a pretty good version of Billy. But for me, it's really important that Camilla stood up for herself when she said she was going to, and that she doesn't like lock them all in this permanent tangled situation. Each of them took some level of agency in the situation that they find themselves in all these years later. And yes, at the end, Camilla's saying, she leaves this interview message for her daughter saying, yeah, tell your dad to call Daisy Jones and tell Daisy Jones to answer. Because this is what the next chapter looks like. But in the show, when she says that to Billy, Sam Claflin as Billy lets out a big breath. And for me, that is telling of how much he's been holding in for all these years. And Camilla knew it, and she saw him trying, and she was willing to accept that he wanted to be in Camilla's life, and she let him be in her life. But when she releases him, she's like, be who you are. Like, you don't have to worry about me anymore. Like, you're not a bad guy for being with me. You're not a bad guy for being with Daisy. Just be who you are and make your choices. And Billy just lets out such a sigh of relief to me in the show. And I don't know. I mean, for me, this is a really huge difference. And I needed to see Camilla stand up for herself in the show, and I needed to see everybody have agency. over some piece of where they ended up in the interview years. Um, and I got that in the show, and I didn't get that in the book. So I don't know. I think depending on your life experience, you may wildly connect more with one thing or the other, the show or the book. And I bet everybody's gonna kind of come down at a different place on this, and that's how I feel about it. Okay, let's talk about Billy. Um, which I've talked about Billy and Daisy a little bit in talking about Camilla, but a few other differences I want to mention about Billy. In the book, when Billy sees Julia for the first time at 63 days old, he loves her immediately and dedicates himself to his family instantly. That doesn't happen in the show. When Billy first meets Julia, his insecurities are raging. He feels uncomfortable with his daughter. He feels uncomfortable holding his daughter. And I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about what this would play out like in real life to know whether one of these options is more realistic than the other. So I reserve judgment on this because I don't know, but maybe if you do, feel free to share your thoughts on what would be more likely. In the book, Billy doesn't take time off from music after rehab. In the show, he does. And again, this is part of him saying, uh, music is the world that got me into so much trouble, and I'm supposed to be the good guy, and I probably shouldn't be exposing myself to temptation like that. So I saw the line of thought and the logic with the show. Um, but in the book, Billy doesn't take time off. In the book, Billy doesn't watch Daisy do drugs, but that becomes a running thing in the show that he likes to watch. And there's innuendo there. There's some sexual innuendo there, but there's also this interesting relationship with temptation where he is tempted by her and he's tempted by the drugs, and he holds himself back from it, the gallant man that he is. Um, so I don't know. It's a detail that's different, but an interesting one, I think. In the book, I wanted to read something from one of the pages about his process of choosing between Camilla and Daisy. Billy says, "Water is what we need to survive. My family was water. I picked water. I'll pick water every time. And I wanted Daisy to find her water because I couldn't be it." You know, that happens around page 289 in my book. In the book, by the end of it, it seems a little more to me like Camilla kind of forced him to pick water, and I don't know if he would have done that on his own. So it wasn't so open and shut for him by the end of the book as it was on page 289. One other thing, I find it interesting the way they sort of flipped Billy and Daisy's choices after stuff with the Six ended. In the book, Billy does continue with music to some degree after the band is done. Not the way that it was happening in the Six, but he doesn't walk away from music completely, where Daisy kind of does, which I thought was an interesting choice. And I don't know if I get the logic in the book with that. I'm not sure. Um, I think it makes sense to me in the show that a Billy who wants to say, "No, Camilla, I am all in forever with you," is a guy who would walk away from music. But I don't know, the book just gives us a different take on it. Okay, Daisy. First of all, one detail from her early days in the book, Daisy has brands sending her things because she was so cool when she was a teenager. She just was turning up on all these music clubs, and she's not a musician yet, and she's got all of these brands sending her stuff because she's becoming like an icon. And it reminded me a little bit of like an Angeline type figure. So like Daisy sort of being portrayed in that way, which I thought was cool. And that jumped out more for me in the book than it did in the show. And it was a detail I really liked from the book because you could sort of build a whole world out there for that. In the book, after writing Honeycomb together, the Six plays a lot of shows at the Whiskey, but they're not inviting Daisy, and they're playing it with Billy's original lyrics. And Daisy crashes one of their shows and sings with them, but she sings her lyrics. So in the show, they sort of approximated this with one show at the Diamond Head Festival. And there's a lot of reasons they had to do that in the show because, first of all, they didn't really have the six touring at this point. So they weren't playing a ton of shows at the Whiskey for Daisy to crash one of the shows. So we get this Diamond Head Festival where you can get the six and Daisy, scheduled together. And you do still need to have the experience of Daisy catching them off guard or flipping the script on them. If she's stepping up onto stage at the Whiskey and sings her lyrics instead of Billy's, then you get that effect. In the show, they tried to approximate that by having Daisy stay for more songs. So she was only supposed to do the one song at the Diamond Head Festival, but she stayed on stage almost the whole time. In the book, Daisy goes to Phuket, not to Ypres, in Greece. She goes so in the show, she goes because this really inflammatory Rolling Stone article just came out. She's done with it. She wants to get away. Everybody's on break, but she just stays gone even when they come back. And she's going to go to Greece in the show and meet Nikki and get married and all that stuff. But in the book, everybody is on break except Billy, who's staying around to sort of mix the album together with Teddy. And so they're all on a break. She meets Nikki. She tells him everything. She doesn't withhold the part of her life that, the six was occupying. She asks Simone to come to Thailand, but then she leaves for Italy, forgetting that she asked Simone to come to Thailand. And then they go back, Nikki and Daisy go back to Rome, and Simone's going to meet them there. But not because Daisy told them they were going there, because Simone found out. So some differences there. I think, with the show, what was the reason for going to Ypres? I mean, I figure part of this was figuring out a place you could shoot during COVID. So that's got to be a factor in choosing that location. I think some of the, Nikki's meant to be an Italian prince in the book. So I don't know, trying to center this around Europe might make more sense. But I imagine that there were a lot of restrictions that they were dealing with at that time when they were looking for locations. In the book, Nikki is a bad influence from the beginning. He doesn't want Daisy to go back to LA. Daisy does kind of want to go, and Simone makes her go. So Nikki has he's not a good influence on her from early days. He goes hard with drugs. In the show, I felt very different about Nikki. Nikki is, I think, a downright understandable character with many dimensions and a lot of grief in episode 7 of the show. I think in episode 8, he takes it upon himself to say, no, we're going to LA. And then he goes with her. And in episode 8, we're seeing this progression of it really dawning on him what this thing with Billy actually is, how big Daisy actually is. She told him about this stuff before they left, but now he sees it and it's very different. And, when she was like, no, I have a hard line with Billy. I'm done with him. It's professional with Billy. But as the longer Billy and Daisy are together on tour, the more what their relationship is starts to seep through, and Nikki can't not see it. And so Nikki and Daisy start to have a lot more that they need to hide from, and they start using the coping mechanism of drugs, and they're both getting more into that and both getting more out of control with that. And for me, it looks more like two people not knowing how to deal with their situation and with pain and trying to cope, versus Nikki in the book is just painted to me as not a good guy. In the show, I think he's a good guy, and it gets out of control, and he gets way too dependent on the drugs. And I see the drugs evolving him. In the book, Nobody else is there but Nikki when Daisy overdoses at the hotel in Rome. He still just puts her in the shower, but there's no Billy or Rod there to save the day. Um, she she survives that. She flies out the next day to start the Aurora tour, and she doesn't leave Nikki his ticket. She tells the front desk to leave a message for him. Lola LaCava wants a divorce. Lola LaCava is, of course, a pseudonym that she uses that's mentioned many times in the book, but not really something that plays in the show. Also, I keep calling him Nicky, but I think in the book they're always calling him Niccolo. In the book, as I said earlier, after the Chicago tour stop, Daisy goes to rehab and she pretty much stops music. She writes, she meditates, she's doing other things, but music isn't really a factor in her life anymore. And I don't know that I don't know. I guess it's one way that she could go. I think it's interesting that Billy and Daisy kind of whether they have involvement in music sort of flips between the book and the show. Okay. One more thing. I'd like to mention some Daisy and Billy details. So we talked about Billy, we talked about Daisy. Now let's talk about Daisy and Billy. So in the book, Daisy knows that Billy doesn't know that she changed the lyrics to Honeycomb. In the show, Teddy plays some tricks on them to get Daisy and Billy together on that song. And that really changes a lot of how I see those characters in the show versus the book. Because in the book, Daisy knows Billy doesn't know that she changed the lyrics. And so it's just like really disrespectful. Like she hasn't met him yet. And and to be willing to do that, I don't know. It feels like trying to torch the relationship before you even start. In the show, Daisy's really caught off guard that Billy hasn't seen the fact that she was asked to change the lyrics or was asked to do something to mix up the song. And she's like, wait, what? And we know Daisy is somebody who can really overstep, but I like the fact in this show that she wasn't actually trying to do that with Billy initially, and that Teddy kind of did it to get Billy to record with her. So for me, that's a pretty big difference. Now, in the book, I want to hone in a little bit on the Jonah Berg stuff. We get one of the first really pivotal moments in the book is when Jonah Berg writes the first article for Rolling Stone. Um, Daisy has fired Hank, and he is so angry that he takes her backing band with her. She's supposed to be opening for the Six at a show for the Numbers tour, and she is gonna they have to figure out what to do. Do you just pull Daisy as the opening act? Is that what you do? The Rolling Stone magazine is here. This is supposed to be a good show. So they work some things out instead. She's gonna play with Eddie. He's gonna be the only person backing her up. She'll do a few songs. And then Billy comes out. He takes it upon himself to come out onto stage with her and to do an acoustic slow version of Honeycomb. Um, then Billy invites the Six on stage. And then Daisy and Billy remember it differently about like whether Billy was okay with her staying on stage for the rest of the set or not. Later that night, Jonah is out with all of them, and Daisy and Billy sing on top of a piano at a piano bar. And Billy says she was so easy to be good with. To me, this is really the first pivotal Daisy Billy moment in the book in terms of their relationship dynamic changing. In the show, I think the first pivotal part was writing Let Me Down Easy together. They spent a whole episode doing that. They spent a lot of time on that piece. So the pivot points are quite different. But in the book, there has to be a second breakthrough when they write a song together for the first time. And so they get like two of these really pivotal moments in the book. In the show, they abbreviated it because they didn't want to have two, like, we have to get from here to there. We have 10 episodes to do it. So in the show, they sort of combined both pivotal moments into one of just writing the first song together. Um, In the book, though, it's interesting for me because Billy reveals a lot about himself very quickly. He's telling Daisy his deepest, darkest secrets from the very beginning, and it caught me off guard a little bit. I think that in the show that happened too, but a lot of it didn't happen in dialogue. We found out later, we found out when we Daisy tells Jonah the scoop about Billy and his rehab. We found out that he was like, I told you about that in secret. But we didn't really see him going to all those levels. So it does kind of catch me off guard that he gets all the way there right away when writing together for the book. Um, but maybe it would have happened. Maybe I just needed to see a little bit more runway in that conversation in the book before he went there. Okay. In the book, when Billy and Daisy are in that groove of writing a lot of songs, Billy comes home every night for his nighttime routine with Camilla. Camilla stays up and waits for him, and then they sort of like lie together and talk through things, and he loves her, and you can definitely tell. In the show, at this point when he's writing a lot with Daisy, you can see his pull towards Daisy and his pull away from Camilla. He's becoming more absent. He's telling her less, and Camilla feels that. I think this was really well visually represented in the show. Um, but it feels like they were trying to tell a different story in the book. So I don't know. In the show, I want to talk about More Fun to Miss versus Impossible Woman, which I think are meant to be sort of the similar song in terms of what they do for the story. More Fun to Miss to me was a song that was written punishing Daisy. It is a song that punishes Daisy when she has to record it. It is a song to punish Daisy. Impossible Woman in the book feels a little bit more to me like Billy punishing himself and having Daisy be the agent. Daisy is the weapon against Billy against himself. Um, so he if, even though he's still like fighting with her to try to get the quality of song that he was looking for from her, he's like encouraging her to try to pull it out of her. And when the song is done being recorded, she seems to be quite proud of the results and that it was really hard to get there, but that was where it needed to go. Um, and so for me, the point of those scenes feels really different. In the book, Billy and Daisy have an almost kiss moment while writing For You. Another unreliable narrator moment. Each of them thinks they left that scenario first. And it's an example, one of many examples of how the book really delves into that unreliable narrator moment because we will never know the truth in the book. In the show, they give us a version of the truth. They give us what happened, and then they give us people's interviews to interpret it. And then one more thing in the book, in Chicago, and this is a big difference, Billy suggests they play Honeycomb, and he comes to Daisy's mic to sing. And there's just all this love happening between them. And she reverts back to his original lyrics for the last part when she sees Camilla watching because Camilla's there for that part of the tour. So different in the show. So different in the show. Um, Daisy instigates the singing of Honeycomb because she wants Billy to go off and be with Camilla. And he leaves in the middle of it. So to go get Camilla. So, part of this, the setup for this is a little different. Teddy's still alive, so Camilla's not on the tour to watch Billy and make sure he doesn't relapse. Like there are some differences in how this was set up, but I also think the difference of who did what changes the gesture a bit. Okay. I've talked about the differences, but there are a few excerpts from the book that I just wanted to read back because I really enjoyed them. The first one is from Elaine Chang, the biographer. She says, and it doesn't get much more obviously broken and more classically beautiful than Daisy Jones. Um, that's said very early in the book, so it really sets up Daisy right away. Rod, at one point, another line that I like, he says, Billy was trying. This was a guy who made so many things seem easy, but he was trying very hard to stay sober, and you could see the strain on him. So I suppose that the amount of trying Billy was having to do in the book to be sober for Camilla feels it matches up for me with the amount of trying he had to do to be with Camilla at the end. This, I love her so much, just feels like, well, of course you love her. You have handcuffs on you and you have to. Um, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this whole thing. um, it's easier for me to swallow the plot that we got in the show for sure. Billy, one more excerpt that I wanted to share. Billy says about Daisy, she was dangerous, and I knew that, but I don't think I could recognize that the safer she felt to me, the more dangerous she was. Yeah, I think Billy's red flag in the show as well goes up quite a lot in those early days with Daisy. And then as he gets more comfortable with her, yeah, that's when the problems can really happen. That's when he's really opened himself up to that temptation. And um, I like the way that it was put in the book. So those are the things that I wanted to spot. Look, there are a lot of differences between the book and the show. There's so many. Some things are really minor, some things are huge. And you never know where they're going to pop up between the book and the show. And as I've been going through these, I've been trying to, in some cases, sort of speculate how we arrived there when you're trying to adapt a project like this to a different format. What are some of the reasons that some of the things would be changed? In some cases, I can guess. In some cases, I can't. But I would love, this is a great opportunity. I'd love to hear from you. Anybody who's watching this, I would love to know which did you consume first, the book or the show, and which did you prefer? And I'm wondering how much alignment there will be between which you saw first or which you read first and which you liked better. So I'm curious about that. I'd love to know if there are other things that stand out to you as differences, or if any of these particular differences, if you felt way better about them in the book or in the show. Um, I know that there's going to be some stuff here that people are probably a lot more emotionally invested in than others. And we all have different life experiences, right? So I think you may very well connect to a story in the book more than the show, or vice versa, because of that. And so I totally appreciate there's no one right or wrong way to look at this show or this book. It's all about we are visiting it all through the lens of our own experiences and our own perspectives and our own moral code. So I think you've probably gotten a pretty good sense of where I land with some of the big differences. Um, and I'd love to understand other perspectives here to open my mind to those as well, because um, I I don't know, I had seen the show so many times before I read the book that I was maybe too locked in on that. So I don't know. I would love to get people's perspectives on this. And, it has been so fun to keep going through and exploring the show from as many different angles as possible. So thank you for being on this journey with me as I explored the differences between the show and the book of Daisy Jones and the Six. And go out there. Don't be the muse. Be the somebody.